From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's ahead. K-State's Walt Fick will talk about control of invasive trees in pastures here in the fall by either of two methods, the basal bark treatment or the cut-stump application. He'll go over the recommended herbicide products for each approach, as well as the application technique for assuring good control. Then, from the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen is joined by K-State's Rich Llewlyn. They'll preview that series of Kansas Income Tax Institutes to be conducted by K-State Agricultural Economics in the coming weeks. And awaiting with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas, K-State's Gus van Der Hoeven. All that straight ahead on Agriculture Today. Thanks for tuning in. This is the K-State Radio Network, and you're listening to Agriculture Today. For you pasture managers, an opportunity exists here in the fall to get on top of some of those more troublesome woody brush issues that you have in your grasslands. And there are a couple of methods of going about this here in the autumn stretch. We're joined once again by Range and Pasture Management Specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Walt Fick. Walt, of course, has tried out a number of alternatives to controlling these aggravating species, Walt, but right now is a great time to carry out one of the two methods we'll talk about today, right?
Yes, it's a good time of the year to, we're kind of past the stage when foliar treatments are going to work very well because, the trees are losing their leaves, so using basal bark and cut stump methods would be an approach that would be appropriate this time of the year, and you have a big window of opportunity to do those. Timing's not as critical. Here we are, month of October, November, December. Even when the ground is frozen, you can get good control. Have to be a little careful about, though, once, if you get snow or ice on the surface or around the stump, or even, maybe high water. You'd want to avoid those sort of conditions. But other than that, through the fall and winter is an excellent time to use basal bark or cut stump methods.
And just to point out, the species one would be going after some of the common offenders, such as honey locust, for example, hedge, so forth?
Yes, honey locust, hedge or Osage orange, some people will call that one. But there's lots of others, ash, elms. I've worked with salt cedar, mainly in the southwestern part of the state. Even oak species, can be an issue. You can approach them with this approach.
Let's start with that basal bark treatment. The tree can be left intact for this, right?
Yes, the tree is left intact, and the key point there is you need to, when you spray, you spray from the ground level up maybe 15 or 18 inches above the soil surface, completely around the stem. So that's the approach, and because if you don't, you'll find that if you treat one half side of the trunk, you'll probably have about half the tree defoliated. So you need to treat all the way around. Also, with that method, if you have maybe roots that come above the soil surface or something, I think I'd spray them as well, because sometimes you may kill that main trunk, and then you've got buds, out on these lateral roots sometimes, and those can sprout new plants.
As far as the chemical alternatives for the basal bark treatment, any of several options might work.
The basal bark, I suppose, in general, both this method as well as the cut stump, probably Remedy Ultra is probably the workhorse out of all the products. It'll work on a number of species, but there are others. Crossbow, which is a mixture of the triclopyr that's in Remedy as well, and then 2,4-D. It's been around a long time, and it works quite well on many species. Some of the other products include Pasture Guard, HL, can work quite well on a number of species. Those would be the main ones, I think, in terms of basal bark.
Do all of those require a carrier?
Yes, those are all would need. Either put them in diesel or at least a penetrating oil of some kind.
There is one ready-to-use product that they could look at as well, is there not, for basal bark treatments?
Yeah, Pathfinder 2 could be used as basal bark, although most time I've used it more for the cut stump type applications.
Well, then let's look at the cut stump method then, if we might. And this is, as the name would imply, after one drops the tree with a chainsaw. And as soon as possible, get that treatment on, Walt?
Yes, I think it would be safe. Most time we tell people to treat those stumps relatively soon after the tree has been cut down. It depends a little bit on the product and the carrier. I think that's probably most important, particularly with water-soluble products. I think it's more important to get those stumps treated quickly. If you're using diesel or basal oil, again with something like Remedy Ultra, then I think you've got a little bit more time because the oil and or diesel will kind of help penetrate whatever callus formation that might be taking place on that cut stump surface. But to be safe, I think, you do want to do it within an hour for sure, and a few minutes would even be better. People are working together. One person might be cutting and somebody else follow them up and treat them right away. That would probably be the ideal way to do it.
Here again, though, thorough coverage of that stump is important, is it not?
Well, the most important part of the stump to treat actually is just kind of the outer edge. Once you cut a tree, you'll notice some what we call the sapwood. It's a lighter color toward the outside of that cut surface. That's the living tissue, and that's what's going to transport the herbicide. The central part of the trunk is more or less dead wood, so it's not as important. It kind of depends. If the tree's not too big, if it's only a couple inches in diameter, I just treat the whole surface. But you get one that's 5, 6, 7 inches, then again just treating that outer inch or so is all that's necessary.
As far as product selection here, then, similar to the basal bark method, or do we go a different direction here?
Well, I think those same products work on most of the species. Again, the Remedy and Pasture Guard. Arsenal might be another product one can use, though. I've used that quite effectively on salt cedar, for instance. And the good thing about it is that it doesn't have to be mixed with an oil. You can just mix it with water. So that reduces the cost a little bit with that sort of product. The other ones that producers may have on hand, even a lot of our glyphosate products, Roundup type products, can be used. In those, it might take 50%, or in some cases, the tougher to control species, you might just use it undiluted. And then dicamba or Banville is another one that we can use as a cut stump treatment. A third to 50% solution, and again, just in water. Those can be added to those other products that you may or may not have on hand. If you happen to have those, if you're maybe more of a farmer and apt to have those products on hand, they can be used for many species.
I want to, Walt, highlight briefly here one species that seems to be more of a headache than any others, arguably here, but honey locust, some will say if you cut it down, you just make it mad. And so are there treatment considerations special for it?
I think that's probably true, particularly if you don't do anything with it. It'll come back, you'll have more sprouts, and the thorns will be longer and sharper. But that's one, that's a good one to bring up, because even though those products we mentioned will work, probably one of the better products on common honey locust is actually Milestone. It's been around for several years, but it's been shown to be excellent either as a cut stump, and in that case it's 10% in water. As a basal treatment, it works as well. You need to find a compatible oil to mix with it. You don't mix Milestone with diesel, but with a compatible oil. And there's products out there that'll work. I always kind of encourage people, if you aren't for sure you have an oil around, maybe do a little jar test, put a little chemical and oil together and see whether they stay in solution. If it starts curdling up right away, it's probably not compatible. So you're going to find something different. But honey locust is probably one of our tougher to control species. I'd put it in that same category. I've seen similar issues with salt cedar out in the southwestern part of the state, but Milestone is probably the best product for honey locust.
And with these aggressive resprouters, treating anything and everything you see, including roots, is important.
Yeah, so like I say, honey locust, it'll send those lateral roots out 30, 40 feet, I think, at times. And those occasionally they'll come above the soil surface, and spraying those surfaces as well as the cut stump or the trunk, either one would be important.
Well, we've been talking here, Walt, about treating invasive trees that we find out there in the pasture itself. But if one is looking at more restricted areas like fence rows, there are some other possibilities here.
Yeah, a lot of people want to use Tordon RTU, ready-to-use product, with a little bit of picloram and 2,4-D in it. But it is only labeled for non-cropland type areas. You can use it in your fence row or, like say, around the homestead, but not supposed to be using out on the range or pasture. And probably the reason for that is because I think it uses antifreeze as a carrier, and of course we don't want animals consuming any antifreeze. Another product by the same product actually, but it's called Pathway, usually sold in a little bit higher quantities, let's say, than Tordon and RTU, but the same two chemicals. But again, registered for non-cropland only.
And glyphosate can fit this bill too, can it not?
Well, glyphosate can be used on range and pasture. I've tended to use one, and I'll use a trade name this morning, Roundup Power Max. Mm-hmm. And I look at that label, and it talks about cut-stump treatments, but it says the product can be used on any terrestrial site. Well, that kind of covers, range and pasture. Other thing you'll find on some of the glyphosate labels is it may say, well, it's to use on non-cropland, but then they'll look under the non-cropland part of the label, and it has range and pasture listed there. So you need to read the label to be sure.
That is a valuable source of information, as is the Chemical Weed Control Guide for Field Crops, the 2021 version out of K-State. It does fully cover woody brush control in pasture lands. Walt, thanks for coming over. Always appreciate your time. He's Walt Fick, Range and Pasture Management Specialist with K-State Research and Extension. We'll be back with more. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Agriculture Today continues, and a full preview for you of the 73rd Annual Kansas Income Tax Institute series, put on by the Agricultural Economics Department at K-State and guided and developed by our guest from the Washburn University School of Law, welcoming back in Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation there, Roger McEowen, along with agricultural economist Rich Llewlyn of K-State, who coordinates a good deal of what goes on with this series of institutes. And we'll talk about the mechanics in a moment, but Roger, a long-standing series, enormously popular and of value to those involved in tax preparation.
It is, Eric, and it's really evolved over the years. I've been involved with it almost 30 years. I think this is my 29th year of speaking at the tax schools. And it's really changed over the years. And when I started, I had a look at the history of it going back many, many years, back into the 1940s. A predecessor of mine, actually two predecessors prior to me, who was involved with it back in the 1940s and the 1950s, showed me some of the material from the schools at that time. What it has turned into these days, my goodness. Of course, the tax code is much more complex, but it was really interesting to see what the materials were over 70 years ago. But in another stat that I saw was at one point in time, about 95% of all farm returns prepared for taxpayers in the state of Kansas were prepared by practitioners that went through the K-State tax schools. That's pretty impressive, and I don't know if that number is still there. I suspect that that's probably pretty close to what the current number is, but that's really impressive, and it shows the reach of these tax schools and how well respected they are across the state.
And mentioning at the outset, this is for professional tax preparers, accountants, of course, but it can be anybody who is involved in this process. We've talked about this before. Even farmers or ranchers who go about their own tax preparation, they're welcome to attend as well, you say.
Certainly, we do have some lay people that do attend these seminars, and they do find a benefit out of them. So there's something there for everyone, and we just have such a vast difference of the type of offices, the type of practice, the type of practitioner that attends these schools. And That really makes it pretty dynamic, particularly when the practitioners at the breaks and at the luncheons, they get to intermingle and visit with each other. And that's part of course, the in-person nature of these, which these largely are. You get to collaborate with others that you may not see only a couple times a year, and you get to talk about concepts and what's going on in your practice while you're getting continuing education.
Well, we'll cover a few of the subject matter highlights in just a second, Roger, but let's bring Rich in here. Want to run through the dates and locations, and we will repeat those at the end of our visit here. But, Rich, you have 6 in-person sessions around the state plus 2 online, right?
That's correct, and we start in western Kansas with Garden City and Hays in a couple of weeks, October 25th in Garden City and October 27th in Hays. These are 2-day meetings. And then we move to the Salina and Lawrence the week of November 8th through the 10th. And then Wichita right before Thanksgiving, and Pittsburgh after Thanksgiving on December 8th and 9th. We also have the 2 online webinars, which provide the continuing education and education also. The first one will be November 3rd and 4th, and the second one December 13th and 14th. So one kind of towards the beginning and one towards the end of it.
And like you say, the first rounds are coming up here very soon, week after next. You want registration as soon in advance as possible for all of these, don't you?
We do. We have approached the deadline now for the ones coming up in 2 weeks, but folks can register right up to the time of the meeting or even walk in, and we'll be able to make that work for them.
We'll be back to talk more about the mechanics of participating in just a second, Rich. Roger, if you would, pull out some of what you would consider the keynote subjects that will be covered at these institutes.
Well, it's an interesting situation this year, Eric, because we're in the midst of the potential legislation, and I'll leave it at the word potential because we don't know exactly what's going to happen, if anything, at this point in time. And the thing is, once we start the run of these schools in late October, things are going to change by the time we get to the Pittsburgh school and that last webinar in the middle of December. And in fact, I'm starting to believe that if we get legislation, we may not actually get it until December. And then we run the risk, of course, of that coming in after we have done all of this. And, of course, we're talking about what the law is as of the date of any particular school. And that could change this fall. And so that really keeps us on our toes. And that's going to be a major theme of what we're talking about is, all right, here's the current law. Here's what's proposed. Here's what might change. And here's how it could impact you, your client base, and your practice. So that's one of the interesting dynamics that we have this fall that we don't always have, although it does seem like as a more common occurrence in recent years than we have in the past. But it's a live issue right now. So kind of the new developments, what's hot in the courts right now, what are the issues that are presently before the courts, that's going to be a big issue. And then we'll branch off into some other topics, trust issues, Schedule C, the ag issues, and the Schedule F. We have a chapter on financial distress. What if I'm converting my sole proprietorship into an LLC? Various types of small business issues. There have been a lot of small business tax issues associated with the virus-related legislation over the past year and a half. And then a number of individual taxpayer issues. We'll get into such things as identity theft, virtual currency, individual tax credits, and then we'll have a whole session, an hour or so, devoted to what's going on inside the IRS and dealing with the IRS on certain particular issues.
And for the benefit of agriculture interests, you do have a session set up to look directly at agriculture-based issues and rural investments. Yeah,
that is a big part, particularly out west, although we do emphasize this at all the schools, but we spend a great deal of time on that, depending on where we're at in the state, and particularly in the Hays, the Garden City, webinar number 1, we're going to be heavy on ag. And at the other schools, that's going to be entirely on day 2, but out west, when we're in Garden City, Hays, and for the first webinar, we'll kind of branch the ag issues over both days. We'll cover part of it the first day and part of it the second day.
And before we finish, Roger, want to mention, not only will you be guiding these sessions, but you bring in excellent expertise from outside to contribute to the programs as well.
That's right. I think we have, these schools are taught in just about all the states through the land-grant colleges. I think we have probably the top teaching teams that you're going to find anywhere. out west, joining me on day one is Paul Neefer. Paul is a practitioner with Clifton Larson Allen. He's based out of the state of Washington, but they have offices all over the place. And he and I will do day one in Garden City. Myself and Ross Hurst, retired Kansas IRS senior practitioner liaison, who's been a longstanding presence with me on the tax schools, joins me on the second day everywhere, including out west and on the webinars. And Paul will join me on day one on the first webinar. The other locations, day one is Professor Ed Morse from the Creighton University Law School. He is their tax professor there. He's an excellent speaker. He's also a CPA as well as an attorney, very good presenter of the materials. And then Dan Waters joins Ed on day one at the central and eastern locations. Dan is an attorney and a CPA in Omaha. And then Ross and I will do day two at all of the locations again, as I said.
Very well. Let's bring Rich back in to talk about the particulars of participating, the registration fees, and the advance deadlines and so forth. What do people need to have in mind here, Rich?
Well, for 2 days in person, it's $350, which includes the meals as well as the continuing education. So it's a pretty good deal for that. For the online, since we're not serving meals or anything, it's $290 for both days. We also have a one-day rate for each of those. The registration deadline is actually 2 weeks out from the time of each meeting. So we have come on to that for Garden City. Fees will be going up by $40 then. And that's just kind of a rolling deadline for each meeting. But like I said, we will take people who just walk in right until the very day of the meeting.
All the details are on agmanager.info, are they not?
They are. And they could also email me, rvl@ksu.edu.
Rich's address, again, very simple, rvl@ksu.edu. The 73rd Annual Kansas Income Tax Institutes, hosted by the Agricultural Economics Department out of Kansas State University, all set to go, and we'll run through the dates and locations once more in just a second. Well, Rich, thanks for being along with us for the details on participating, and Roger, thank you for covering this, and the best of luck to the both of you with pulling these sessions off. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Roger McEowen, Washburn University School of Law, and K-State agricultural economist Rich Llewlyn with us. Here are the dates and locations once more for the series of Income Tax Institutes this fall and into winter. Garden City, October the 25th and 26th. Hayes, the 27th and 28th of October. Then in November, the 8th and the 9th at Salina, 9th and 10th at Lawrence, and in November, the 22nd and 23rd at Wichita. The final in-person session, Pittsburgh in far southeast Kansas, December the 8th and the 9th. The online sessions, the webinar number 1, November the 3rd and the 4th. Webinar number 2, December the 13th and the 14th. Full details again at agmanager.info. We'll return shortly with more. This is Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
My mistake was to sit up straight.
That's Gus van Der Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
A few weeks ago, I gave a copy of my book, Stop, Look, and Listen. This is live in Kansas, to a friend of mine. He travels a lot, and I thought it would be a good read when he must stay in a motel. A few weeks later, I received a note telling me how much he enjoyed the book. And then he added, it's full of Gusisms. I don't know what a Gusism is, but he clarifies it by adding pearls of wisdom. I'm not so sure that there are pearls in the words I wrote down, but I am glad he is enjoying it. I expect by now he must be getting to the end. It is true that by this stage in life, I probably am supposed to have some wisdom or be smart. Supposed to be. However, It's 2 weeks ago that I made a big mistake when I got up in the morning. That was in Texas at my son's place, Marlack Farm. We were going to drive back home that day, the 12-hour drive. The idea was to get up fairly early and after a quick breakfast, start driving north to Manhattan. My mistake was to sit up straight, shoot up from the flat position of laying down, and bingo, the world started turning. I recognized the symptoms of having had it before. Vertigo. I managed. I didn't tell anybody. Walking and quickly packing the car was an effort. Talina, my daughter, did her part. We said our goodbyes and waved to the help, who were leading the horses in the early morning to the still wet paddocks. It was a gorgeous morning. I sat behind the wheel, carefully telling myself, I can do this. I hadn't told anyone how I felt. Maybe that is a Gusism. I felt that I could drive and decided to drive on and share the driving later after my 4-hour shift. Then Talina, my daughter, would drive the next 4 hours, and I would drive the last 4 hours through parts of Oklahoma and then home. The driving with focus on the road was okay, no problem. The filling up with gas was, but I managed. We drove up the hill at about 7:30 that evening, and once home I told of my condition, and did get scolded by my daughter. Ah, a true Van Der Hoeven. Fathers, prepare themselves from the wrath of their daughters. It's now been nearly 3 weeks ago that I got up too quickly, and from all reports, it should get better. Loving friends have made all kinds of suggestions, from taking Dramamine to a bottle of ginger root tablets. I'm fascinated by the ginger root tablets. On the bottle is written, Nature's Truth. Talina and I did the remedial hanging head exercise. The quickly upright, down again, turn, head moves. I think it helped. That is a Gusism. I think it helped.
Gus van Der Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. That's our time for today. As always, we appreciate you tuning in. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.